Hello everybody, it's Vertical Sandwich. Welcome back to Book Reviews. Today we'll be reviewing, today I'll be reviewing the 1993 co-winner of the Hugo Award. It is Doomsday book by Connie Willis. Now, Connie Willis has won 3 Hugo Awards for 4 books, which is kind of weird. She won one year for 2 books, a book and its sequel. So I don't know how to kind of wrap that up in my head, like that she's not a 4-time winner. She's a 3-time winner for 4 books, which is weird. The only 2 4-time winners of Hugo Awards, not including retro Hugos, are Heinlein and McMaster Beald. So, and we've talked about, I think, one Heinlein novel or 2 Heinlein novels, and we've talked about 1 Beald, but it doesn't matter. So this is my first read by Connie Willis. It's the only book by her I've ever read. So here we go. When Kervin Engel travels back through time to complete her doctoral thesis, due to an accident she lands in the middle of the Black Plague in 1348. Meanwhile, the Oxford she left behind is laid low by a mysterious strain of influenza, and with no one willing to risk arranging her rescue, time is running out. So, all right. So here's what happens in this book. This girl is a college student in like the year 2060, and time travel has been invented, and she gets permission to go back to the Middle Ages, and she's supposed to go to 1320, but there's a problem, and she ends up in 1348, which is the year that the Black Plague hit England. The bubonic plague is actually just one type of the Black Plague. There's 3 types of plague. I learned this because of this book. Now, the first half of the book, she thinks she's in 1320. She doesn't get it. She doesn't think plague is a problem. But she catches this flu and goes back in time, and then she's laid low by the flu and is like delirious with this flu, and then is nursed back to health. So, yeah, let's read a passage. What has happened here is she has gone to the local church, and when she was delirious, she saw this person that she thought was this highway bandit or this murderer, who she refers to as the cutthroat, and she doesn't realize that it's the local priest. So she's been hearing about this priest, and she goes to the church, and she sees this guy, and she freaks out and thinks he's gonna murder her or rape her, but he's just the local priest. So, Father Roche. The stiff reins came suddenly loose in Kerwin's hand. Father Roche. I went in the bell tower, but he was not there. Oh, and she's with this little girl named Agnes, who's like 4. Agnes said, "Why was the wicked man hiding in grandfather's tomb, Lady Kivrin? Father Roche, but it couldn't be. Father Roche had given her the last rites. He had anointed her temples and the palms of her hands." "Will the wicked man hurt Father Roche?" Agnes asked. "He couldn't be Father Roche. Father Roche had held her hand. He had told her not to be afraid. She tried to call up the face of the priest. He had leaned over her and asked her name, but she hadn't been able to see his face because of all the smoke. And while he was giving her the last rites, she had seen the cutthroat. She had been afraid because they had let him in the room. She had tried to get away from him, but it hadn't been a cutthroat at all. It had been Father Roche." "Is the wicked man coming?" Agnes said, looking anxiously at the church door. It all made sense. The cutthroat leaning over her in the clearing, putting her on the horse. She had thought it was a vision from her delirium, but it wasn't. It had been Father Roche, come to help Gawain bring her to the manor. "The wicked man isn't coming," Kivrin said. "There isn't any wicked man." "Hides he still in the church?" "No, I was wrong. There isn't any wicked man." Agnes looked unconvinced. "You cried out," she said. Kivrin could hear her telling her grandmother, "Lady Catherine and Father Roche were in the church together, and she cried out." Lady Demain would be delighted to have this to add to her litany of Father Roche's sins, and to Kivrin's list of suspicious behavior. "I know I cried out," Kivrin said. "It was dark in the church. Father Roche came upon me suddenly, and I was frightened." "But it's Father Roche," Agnes said, as if she could not imagine anyone being frightened by him. When you and Rosamond play at hiding and she jumps suddenly at you from behind a tree, you cry out, Kivrin said desperately. One time Rosamond hid in the loft when I was looking at my hound, and she jumped down. I was so afraid I cried out like this, Agnes said, and let out a blood-curdling shriek. And another time, it was dark in the hall, and Gaywood jumped out from behind the screens, and he said, "Fie!" And I cried out. And that's right, Kivrin said. It was dark in the church. Did Father Roche jump out at you and say, "Fie"? Yes, Kivrin thought. He leaned over me, and I thought he was a cutthroat. No, she said. He didn't do anything. Go we still with Father Roche for the holly? If I haven't frightened him away, Kivrin thought. If he hasn't left while we've stood here talking. She lifted Agnes down. Come on, we must go find him. She didn't know what she'd do if he'd already gone. She couldn't take Agnes back to the manor and tell Lady of Mine how she had screamed, and she couldn't go back without explaining to Father Roche. Explaining what? That she thought he was a robber? A rapist? That she thought he was a nightmare from his delirium? Must we go into the church again? Agnes asked reluctantly. It's all right. There's no one there except Father Roche. In spite of Kivrin's assurances, Agnes was unwilling to go back in the church. She hid her head in Kivrin's skirts when Kivrin opened the door and clung to her leg. It's all right, Kivrin said, peering into the nave. He was no longer by the tomb. The door shut behind her, and she stood there, with Agnes pressed against her, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the darkness. There's nothing to be afraid of. Okay. So, meanwhile, in modern day, while in future Oxford, there is a horrible influenza ravaging the community, and they're quarantining the area. And a lot of this novel is about how modern day society deals with disease outbreaks versus medieval society, right? But here's the thing about this book. I have a tendency, I have this giant pile of Hugo Award winners. And so when I decide what Hugo Award winner I want to read next, my tendency is to grab a small book because it's quick, right? Nobody wants to read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell when you can read, like, Stranger in a Strange Land. Like, one book is a third the size of the other. So Connie Willis's books are pretty infamously thick. This one is almost 600 pages. It's like 590 pages. And so I put off a lot of Connie Willis, not because I had any experience about Connie Willis, but because there are always smaller books. And finally I'm getting to the point where I only have like 15 Hugo Award winners left to read, and 4 of them are Connie Willis books. So I was just like, oh, I have to read a book, and I picked this up. And here's the thing that you don't expect about this book, right? Clearly, Connie Willis knows a lot or learned a lot about medieval history to write this book. It's very detailed and very believable. And what did she do with that profound talent? She wrote a first-person perspective of the Black Plague. This book reads like a horror novel. Like, it's, like, you just can't stop. You just, like, you start reading it, you kind of get into it, and you're like, oh, all these characters are nice. And then the Black Plague shows up, and you're like, oh, I really like everybody in this book. Oh, no. And exactly what happens, exactly what logically would happen, happens. A plague that kills tons of people in horrible ways. The Black Plague is like a hemorrhagic fever. It's like Ebola, but yeah. So I mean, man, and Kivrin is immune. She's been vaccinated against the plague because she's a time traveler. So with impunity, she can watch this thing happen to this community. Whereas again, in present day Oxford, the same thing is kind of going on, where this disease, like the flu, is just knocking people down in this horrible pandemic. And you kind of get that perspective from people who aren't immune and are all catching it. And then you go back to like 1348, and you get to watch this person who is immune from the plague just doing, and she has all this, it just does all this stuff where she just develops all this magical thinking about how they can all escape to a place where the plague won't get them, or like how if she just does these things, like maybe people won't catch the Black Plague. And the thing about that is those things aren't gonna, I mean, that you can't, it's the Black Plague, it's a horror movie. It's just a horror movie written in this book set in 1348. And like you root for goodness and things to work out and stuff against, in the face of what, kills something like some ridiculous proportion, like a third of the population of Europe or something. I mean, I don't even remember what the rate of, but it's when they realize she's in the Black Plague, somebody actually says there's like, we just sent her back to a time where they stacked dead bodies along the side of the road because they didn't have time to bury them. And like you go, oh, that's a thing that happened. Like that's just a thing that happened. And this is a this is the Sci-Fi Masterworks collection. This is a masterpiece. Like, this is so good. I couldn't put it down. I just couldn't. It has, like, this driving energy, and it's just, the things you learn are interesting. The way things happen are interesting. It never takes you out of, like, 1348. You're just there. You're just like, oh, this is stuff that's going on. I'm getting a history lesson. I like these characters. They have problems. Like, this is, they're relatable characters. And then in modern Oxford, you're like, oh, this is a believable future, blah, blah, blah. And then stuff happens, horrible stuff happens to everybody, and you go, I can imagine this horrible stuff, and I'm terrified, and now I'm depressed. It was awesome. It was so good. So good. I can't tell you how much, like, a disease pandemic, like, tearing through characters you like described well, is just, it's a horror that I can't describe. And there's something masterful about how deeply this book makes you feel. Like how you just, like how absolutely, it's just like, it's like the best kind of war novel, except what people are fighting is a disease that has no cure. It was so good. It was so good. It was so brilliantly, beautifully good. And I love this. Like I said, I couldn't stop reading it. And I was just like, I kept saying things like, when are people going to stop dying? Like, I just couldn't believe the death toll. And just how you would just, like, stuff would just be happening. And you're like, oh, and then this happened. Like, you're like, oh, there's 3 more characters. Like, unbelievable. So good. So good. And it really felt for, like, it was so believably, like, I really loved the characters. And it really just tore me up, the way things happened. And, amazing. Amazing. You don't realize. It'll make you want to read books about the Black Plague because of how horrendously, when it's humanized, it's even worse. And then you start looking at stuff and you just go, like, this is amazingly awful. The horrible thing that happened to people when they didn't know. Like, they just thought that it was like the punishment of God. And she's like, at one point, Kivrin's just like, somebody says something about it being the punishment of God, and she just goes, oh, it's just a disease. And they go, yeah, we know. And she goes, in her head, she just goes, but they don't know. And they don't. They have no idea. No idea. Like, oh, so good. It's pretty rare. Maybe 1 out of every 20 Hugo Award winners, 1 out of every 15, gets me super jazzed up by how good it is. And this is one of those. This is one of those books that I just got, like, it was, oh, okay. I had to pause at the 15-minute mark because sometimes it starts another video.
So I had to. It did. It waited until I started to talk, and then it started another video. Yeah, so this got me super jazzed up. I was just amazed at the mastery in writing and narrative and character development, and then description of historical stuff and people and processes. Like, I was just, and then every good book, tells you things, like reveals things to you that you don't know throughout the course. Ideally, you don't want to see things coming. You want to be genuinely surprised. And this book did that as well. Like, it did these things very well. It did everything perfectly. It was so good. I learned that this is the mask of a plague doctor, or the outfit of a plague doctor. And the reason they have the beak nose is because they thought the smell of death was what carried the plague. So that nose was like stuffed with herbs and scented things, so that they didn't have to smell what they were doing. See? That's how good a book this is. It taught me stuff about plague doctors. It also taught me things about the plague. And, just read this. Just read it. Just read it. Just read this book right here. Doomsday book. Because, man, it's so good. It's a tour de force. It really is. It just, like, grabs you at the beginning and pushes you through the story with such an amazing amount of energy that when you come out the other side, you're like, I'm exhausted and sad and happy to be a human being who lives in a world with antibiotics. Oh, read it. Just seriously this is an unbelievable book. So good. So, that's it for this week. When we come back next week, we will be talking about another thing. A different Hugo Award winner. Bye, everybody.